Are you tired of brisket that's just okay? Yeah, me too. For years, following these barbecue gurus and what they tell you to do left me with nothing but dry and tough meat. Now, the barbecue gurus, they skip some steps. They don't show you the step-by-step process. And that's why most home cooks struggle. And my turning point was when I finally realized that I was relying too much on cooking times and not enough on internal temperatures. And once I focused on a different approach, the results spoke for themselves. Now I'm consistently making briskets that make people say, wow. And are you ready to ditch the guesswork? I'm going to walk you through 5 things that I wish I knew when I first started cooking briskets. The kind of stuff that took my briskets from disappointing to delicious. Let's get started. Now, mistake number 1 is not choosing the right brisket. There's a couple different options that you have for brisket. You can either do a flat, a point, or a whole packer. Now, the flat, that's going to be your thinnest piece of meat. It doesn't have a lot of marbling. Your point, that's the one that is thicker. It has all the marbling. And then you have a whole packer, which is a combination of the point and the flat. And this is, for me, is going to be my preferred option. And not choosing the right brisket can totally ruin your barbecue. And when I first started, I used to grab whatever brisket was on sale. It didn't matter if it was the flat or the point or a whole packer, or if it didn't have any marbling. Whatever was the cheapest, that is what I chose. And that led to pretty underwhelming results. You're talking about dry, you're talking about tough, you're talking about chewy. All of these things, I had them in spades, and it's not what you want. When you go to the grocery store, what you're going to be looking for is a brisket that has a good amount of marbling. You're going to be looking for one that is either choice or prime. Prime is going to be the highest grade, choice is going to be in the middle, and then select, that's going to be your lowest grade. And that's going to be the type of brisket that you're going to want to avoid. The main key difference between the grades is the amount of marbling. And that's those little white streaks that's running throughout the meat. We want a lot of fat in the intermuscle. We don't want a lot of fat just on the fat cap. We want it within the muscle. And then a pro tip here is, while it's cold and in the refrigerator section, if you can take the brisket and you can bend it where the point and the flat almost touch, that shows that there is a good amount of moisture and that there's a good amount of fat within that brisket, and that's going to be the one that you want to choose. Now, if you get one of the briskets and it's hard as a rock and it doesn't want to bend whatsoever, you're probably going to want to avoid that brisket. Then mistake number 2 is going to be not trimming the fat cap. I've seen a lot of people where they just buy a brisket and they put the brisket right onto the smoker. That also sets you up for bad results, because a lot of these briskets, yeah, they do come trimmed, but they're not trimmed. They're not uniformly trimmed. And what I mean by uniformly is, you want about a 1/4 of an inch of fat on the fat cap. If you have thicker parts and you have thinner parts, they're going to cook or render at different rates, and you're going to get mixed results in the final product. So what I like to do is get a nice even fat cap so that I get an even rendering throughout the cook. Now, when you trim the fat cap, be careful, because you can go from the perfect thickness of fat cap to cutting the fat cap completely off and exposing the meat. And if you expose the meat, this is going to be the first part of the brisket that dries out. And when it comes to that fat, do not get rid of it, because you can always convert it to tallow at a later point. And then mistake number 3 that I see is people over seasoning their brisket. They think that since this is a large piece of meat, that they can just put as much seasoning as they want onto the brisket and not have it affect anything. And that's a big problem here. What I like to do is go with a 50-50 blend of salt and pepper as my base. And what this is going to do is give me a nice covering onto the brisket. And when I use salt, I use a coarse kosher salt, which is going to be different from my table salt. If I use table salt, that salt is going to actually penetrate into the meat, and it's going to leave me with a very salty brisket. Same thing with the pepper. If I have fine granules, that pepper is going to penetrate way too far into the meat, and it's going to get really peppery, and it's going to give me a bad result. So what I like to do is use coarse black pepper and coarse salt. I layer these on top of the brisket, and I do it kind of generously, but I still want the meat to shine through. If it looks like I already have a bark without putting the brisket onto the smoker, and then I know I have way too much seasoning. And if you're new to backyard barbecue and you need some help with smoking times and temperatures, I have a free guide that covers everything from meats to veggies and it's perfect for getting started. Just drop a 100 in the comments below and I'll send it your way. Now, mistake number 4 is not monitoring the internal temperature. These briskets, yeah, they take a long time in order to cook, but you can go from a perfectly juicy, tender brisket to a dry one in a heartbeat. And how you get around that is using a meat probe. I like to use the Meter Plus. I just stick it right into the thickest part of the meat, open up the app, and let it run. It's going to give me an estimated time of how long this brisket is going to take. And I can kind of gauge when I need to do things for the brisket based off the cooking time. When it comes to the internal temperature, what we're looking for is going to be between 200 and 205 degrees Fahrenheit. This is going to be the sweet spot. This is where you're going to get that tender, juicy meat. If you go above this temperature, you might get into a dry brisket. And don't rush this process. Low and slow is going to be the one that wins the race and not hot and fat. And then mistake number 5 is not letting your brisket rest. Resting is so important. You're going to want to let this rest for about 1 to 4 hours, wrapped in a towel, in a cooler, or you can even use the oven. You don't want those juices to be all over your cutting board. You want those juices to be in the meat. And by resting it, it allows the juices to redistribute throughout the meat. And by resting it, you have time to make your side dishes. You also have time to make your own barbecue sauce. So just be patient, let it rest, and in the long run, you're going to thank yourself. And here's some bonus tips. For that perfect smoke ring, you're going to want to use either post oak or hickory. Whatever's available in your area, that's going to be what you want to use. Now, if you want a light fruity smoke, you can go ahead and use applewood. Tip number 2 is that you're going to want to spritz your brisket. And you can spritz it every 45 minutes after the bark is set. And one way of telling that your bark is set is that when you touch the bark, you don't get any of the bark transferring onto your finger. At that point, go ahead and start spritzing every half hour to 45 minutes. You could do this with water, apple cider vinegar, apple juice. You could also use maybe a soda like a Diet Coke or a Dr. Pepper to add some flavor. The main thing that we're looking for is adding moisture. By spritzing, we're not necessarily adding the flavor though. And then tip number 3 is you're going to want to find a temperature that works with your schedule. So 225 degrees works perfect for me. Now, if I'm running short on time, I do bump it up to about 250 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe 275 at the most. That's going to be the highest. But I really like to go for low and slow, so I'm looking for that 255 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's it. That's 5 brisket mistakes that I'll never make again, and how you can avoid them too. And if you stick with these steps, you're going to get a brisket that's tender, juicy, has that perfect smoke ring, has that perfect bark, and it's just downright delicious. But it's not the only way to cook a brisket. Check out this video right here where I cooked the tenderest, juiciest, and the most insanely delicious brisket I've ever cooked. You're not going to want to miss this. So check out this video right here, and I'll see you there.